EarlyWorks, and for those of you who are not familiar with EarlyWorks, we're a Detroit-based, women-led strategy and insight consultancy. If you have questions, please pop them into the Q&A, and Sarah's going to monitor those for us, and we'll address them at the end. EarlyWorks typically serves nonprofits, philanthropy, and municipalities, but we sometimes work with public-private partnerships, and so that's where data fluency comes in often. We are ourselves a small business, and I have been working for or managing a specialized consultancy since my oldest child was born 16 years ago. So lots of small business experience. Before EarlyWorks, I worked with brands like Cardinal Health, Media, Fidelity, Grand Marnier, Steelcase, Stryker, the Lyric Opera, Chicago, WellPet, many others. My market research experience encompasses more than 200 studies reflecting community, consumer, professional, and patient stakeholder experiences. Today I have 3 goals for us in this talk together. 1, to help you see something differently. 2, to give you some idea where to go for more information and to share some resources that have been helpful to me. And 3, to challenge the mindset that you are not a data person. So let's get started. Research conducted by media outlets like Forbes, Inc., Entrepreneur, and Repeated Locally reveals that entrepreneurs like us are motivated by a responsibility to society, by the desire to address unmet needs in our communities, and by the hope of creating something for our families. Especially clear to anyone who interacts with the Detroit entrepreneur community, we support each other and we are driven to contribute. In fact, survey results during COVID revealed that many of you, business owners who were yourselves struggling, were feeding frontline staff, rescuing and redistributing food, and making PPE. How does a business started by someone like us, motivated by the kinds of things that motivate us, end up getting sued by the ACLU? Or, being responsible for one of the world's largest data breaches? Yes, these are hyperbolic examples, and I'm picking on tech businesses because they're low-hanging fruit right now, but losing focus on the customer isn't only something that happens to tech companies. It's very trendy to use the frame customer-centric in business content right now, when in fact it has always been crucial for business to remember that our purpose is to serve our customers. More importantly, as businesses, we must remember that our customers and our staffs are humans. Consider privacy. Human behavior suggests we don't care as much about privacy as we say we do. Although we like the idea of data privacy, we don't seem to value data enough to take concrete steps to protect it. For example, we routinely choose free services over paid models. And if you're not paying for it, you're not the customer, you're the product. We've become conditioned to expect personalization and the related efficiencies. We reward entities that deliver radical convenience with our loyalty and our word of mouth. But I think the most obvious explanation for this confounding behavior is a lack of data fluency. Pew Research reports that 91% of Americans feel they have lost control of their data and they don't really know what to do to get it back. We're being tracked and leaving data trails like never before. In her book, Surveillance Capitalism, Shoshana Zuboff refers to this tracking phenomenon as unprecedented, and the related conflict results in a psychic numbing that disposes us to rationalize the situation in resigned cynicism, to create excuses that operate like defense mechanisms, like I have nothing to hide in my data, or find other ways to stick our heads in the sand, choosing ignorance out of frustration and helplessness. At the end of the day, we are all data people. We have no choice. So let's take a quick minute for some specific definitions that I'll be using throughout the rest of the talk. When I use the word data, I'm referring to specific details. For example, your name and your address are data. So is your height, your weight, your political party affiliation, your hometown. Data collection can be a noun or a verb, and it refers to gathering data. For example, a petition drive, or your customer relationship management is a data collection, or your newsletter subscriber list is data collection. Data visualization is a way to see data, for example, on a map, on a dashboard, or in a web interface. Individual or personal data are a record that reflects details about an individual or one person, whereas aggregated data is a collection of records about many people, typically for some kind of analysis. And then predictive data is a collection of records about many people, oftentimes revealing some kind of behavior, like web searching, that is analyzed via an algorithm, one or more, in an effort to predict future or other types of behavior. Data fluency is rapidly becoming the next major societal gap, with many people unable to access critical factors to engage socially and societally, civically. Businesses are profiting from this lack of fluency. Let's look at what I mean. We're shedding data just by virtue of being alive, according to the Future Today Institute. The amount of data generated and stored by organizations around the world grows by over 2.5 quintillion bytes every day, according to the Harvard Business Review. We're inviting surveillance into our homes at a historic rate. Again, according to Pew, and this was before last holiday season, 25% of Americans have a smart speaker in their home. And yet, 54% say they are very or somewhat concerned about the amount of personal data their speakers collect. 58% are not in favor of additional preference-based personalization, especially if that means additional data collection. 49% of Americans said it is unacceptable for the makers of smart speakers to share audio recordings of their customers with law enforcement to help with criminal investigations. Predictive analytics are being employed across many sectors, often without user knowledge and in violation of laws. Pre-COVID, at least 14 public and private universities in the United States worked with outside consulting companies to collect and analyze data on prospective students by tracking their web activity or formulating predictive scores to measure each student's likelihood of enrolling. Consider this Washington Post story, and I want to read the details so that you hear it. The software sent an alert to the school's assistant director of admissions containing the student's name, contact information, and details about her life and activities on the site. The email said she was a graduating high school senior in Little Chute, Wisconsin, of Mexican descent who had applied to UW Stout. The admissions officer also received a link to a private profile of the student, listing all 27 pages she had viewed on the school's website and how long she spent on each one. A map of this page showed her geographical location, and an affinity index estimated her level of interest in attending the school. Her score of 91 out of 100 predicted she was highly likely to accept an admission offer from UW Scout. These practices may raise a hidden barrier to a college education for underprivileged students. While colleges have used data for many years to decide which regions and high schools to target their recruiting, the latest tools let administrators build rich profiles on individual students and quickly determine whether they have enough family income to help the school meet revenue goals. Additionally, kids from lower income families have less internet access, oftentimes resulting in less school website activity, thus lowering their ratings in these affinity indexes. Interestingly, the education department can suspend all federal funding to any school it finds in violation of FERPA, and FERPA is the Privacy Act that dictates colleges, or that rules colleges. But it has never imposed that penalty in 40 to 45 years since that law was created. At the end of the day, our customers and our staff and our prospective customers are humans, and our businesses exist within communities of humans. As such, we are responsible for maintaining trust in and among those humans and our communities. This is a quote from Raman Chowdhury. She is Accenture's responsible artificial intelligence lead, and she's an advocate for the Algorithmic Accountability Act and resolutions on guidelines for the ethical development of artificial intelligence. This is not just a business issue or a nonprofit issue, or like in the last example, an education issue. These are societal issues. Companies need to acquire data fluency and help improve customer data fluency in order to establish and retain our customers' trust, to avoid unintended consequences, and to live our values. Oops. Catherine Madden is well known in the data visualization world, and this was a visualization she created on data equity. I think it's important because she points out that data are not objective, and that data science is a subjective process, that there's culture embedded in data. Because at the end of the day, when I say that we're not data people, data are people. And I like the point she makes in this quote: paid for by people, collected by people, analyzed by people, shaped by people. Being customer-centric and prioritizing human flourishing are about prioritizing the humans in our ecosystems, our customers, our employees, our residents. At a time with less institutional protection and fewer objective societal referees, we need our local business community to understand how these data-driven systems work and to act in our customers' and communities' interests. So let's talk about facial recognition software as an example. Very, very relevant. There was an interesting piece in Detour Detroit this morning, and Bridge Detroit has also covered this recently. The governance and oversight of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms, which are components in this technology, is in its infancy. That's why I raised this issue. Data fluency is required to make informed decisions and to understand potential trade-offs. The video that's captured by these systems is data, and it's being shared. There are at least two sides to every coin, and surveillance video is billed as a safety feature. In Crane's yesterday, in fact, there was a quote that said, "Since Project Greenlight was created, carjackings have dropped nearly 60% in one review. A city report in 2019 showed 222 occurring during January through June in 2015 versus 94 during that same period in 2019. Incidentally, during that same time, the city also improved street lighting and hired more patrol officers." But the other side of that coin is that numerous studies have shown that facial recognition software misidentifies Black faces at a much higher rate than white faces, which could lead to false arrests. This chart on the slide is from a newsletter that I subscribe to. It's an MIT technology review source, and it shows you accuracy just in gender classification. And you can see among these 5 facial software recognition providers that there's a huge gap from 1.5% all the way up to 31.4% in their accuracy. We can consider China as an example in the extreme. According to a New York Times article earlier this year, in their system, when someone is stopped at a checkpoint, their system allows you to retrieve that person's photo, home address, official identification number, as well as then to sift through billions of records, display details on her education, family ties, links to any earlier cases, and recent visits to hotels and internet cafes, likely based on her credit card history. Informed consumers are going to extremes to protect themselves. This is what it looks like when your customers don't trust you. For example, on the left, Chicago-based eyewear retailer Reflecticals allows you to buy eyewear that blocks infrared lights that prevents facial mapping. And this clothing company on the right has clothing that confuses automatic license plate readers. I bring this case up because it's a data-based case and also because there is a potential for ripple effects. For example, while you may not be a facial recognition software vendor, as one of their customers, your business is at risk for its reputation and consumer trust are at risk because of their unregulated practices and the stories surrounding the false arrests and what's being done, the lack of responsibility with their data sharing. So what I'm trying to encourage in this conversation is to think about us, to trying to be intentional about balancing both the societal and monetary value of your business. Despite all these previously negative examples, sharing data can contribute to the well-being of all society. For example, contact tracing is a very relevant current example. When private mobility data is given freely to public health agencies, contact tracing is possible. If this is done responsibly, there can be some significant societal benefit to that. Value can be co-created when public and private entities share data, and I'll share some examples in just a minute. Think of this as similar to the open source software movement for those of you who are familiar. In that case, you have a very robust business model around policy and legal instruments that encourage open collaboration and peer learning. A data collaborative can be like that. And data collaboratives can be public interfaces. In the current Census 2020 work, there are a few public interfaces. Data collaboratives can come from trusted intermediaries. And data pooling is another example of a data collaborative, and that's where you have a data set and I have a similar data set, and we put them together and we look at them together. But in order for this to work, there need to be strong privacy protections. And usually that's anonymized data, which means data where the person's name or identity could never be figured out or traced back, or aggregated data. Those are common ways that people address privacy protections. However, data aggregation can present its own problems if you're aggregating data without an equity lens or context. For example, disparities can occur when you're aggregating regional employment data by race. So you see how the desire for privacy protection and equity require very careful consideration. This picture is from ICIC's national conference at Boston last fall, where business strategist and Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter makes his case for what he calls shared value. He maintains that there is a synergy between business success and societal success rather than a trade-off, which has long been the assumption, especially on the sort of in the Wall Street circles. In his work, he's found that when a company operates in a weak business environment that has negative economic impacts, which just means when a company is not paying attention to its local community, the loss of productivity and profitability follow. He has developed and is encouraging companies to use something he calls a shared value strategy. And since 2011, he has encouraged companies to build this approach into their business model as a core component of their strategy. There are 3 levels of shared value as he defines it. And data collaboratives, which we just talked about, is a level 3 example typically. And we'll talk a little bit more about these in some examples of these in just a minute. But you already know this. Every company touches social issues and challenges. So with these 3 levels in mind, your shared value strategy, should you choose to build one, requires that you document the answer to these 2 questions. Number 1, what social issues does my business touch? And number 2, what social conditions does my business depend upon? The idea is to think about the answer to those questions and to document them, write them down, and build them into your corporate values, your company values. So what does a shared value strategy look like? What are some examples of shared value strategies? This one on the left comes from a site called Trend Watching, and they have been tracking COVID-related innovations specifically lately. Land O'Lakes, very surprisingly, I guess, or surprised me, they're a dairy company, and they offered free Wi-Fi to their rural customers. They did a 6-week trial for usage and they set up designated areas in the parking lot surrounding their factories, stores, and offices. They had data that that national or global data that showed that nearly 1 in 2 customers globally have zero internet access, which was further exacerbated by COVID shutdown, and many free outlets like libraries and coffee shops were no longer available. We, of course, on the right-hand side of this slide, are no stranger to internet access discussion in Detroit. This is a map of the census response rate from maybe last week or the week before. You'll notice that the 2 red sections on the map where census response rates are lowest also have a relationship to the least amount of internet access. This is another shared value strategy. In this case, there's a shared value proposition. It's an example where customers willingly share data in order to benefit from a company aggregating their data and providing them access to then that aggregated data. In this example, Thomson Reuters is considered a trusted data intermediary among the community that it serves. They have a data share application, which they created for farmers to use and food producers. And the farmers and food producers put in proprietary and location-based data around the crops that they're growing. They're allowed to, this app allows them to confidentially share their information about crop conditions, supply chain disruptions, pricing, and other logistics. And then Thomson Reuters can create a very detailed view of the supply of various crops, which can be analyzed and shared as forecasts. So in exchange for the data that they provide, farmers are then given high-level insight from a trusted source into a comparatively opaque market in which they operate to help them better market their products and better plan their planting based on reliable and trusted data that's gathered in an ethical and transparent manner. So this is an example of a public-private collaboration, and it's not the only one, but it's one that I've come across recently. This report on beltlining that relates to housing in Atlanta was produced with the Housing Justice League and the Research Action Cooperative with support from volunteers and a group called Showing Up for Racial Justice, Atlanta members, and the local data design lab at Georgia Tech. Housing Justice League is a grassroots member-led organization working to empower renters and homeowners to self-organize and defend their rights to remain, while the Research Action Cooperative is a worker-owned firm of seasoned professionals who champion research and popular communication as vital and necessary to the project of societal change. And then the local data design lab at Georgia Tech is a combination of students and teaching staff. So we talked also about strong privacy protections, that a good data collaborative, this is, must have strong privacy protections. What can companies do, like us? We can support policy reforms, and we can promote responsible information use, and we can limit our own use of personal information for prediction in our business models. There are national bipartisan federal policy efforts underway. This is one, Privacy for America. And in the meantime, we should be very wary of large corporations like Amazon and Microsoft lobbying for solely self-serving regulations. A few of the details in the Privacy for America framework, they're advocating for prohibitions against using consumer data to determine eligibility for jobs, healthcare, financial aid, insurance, creditor housing outside of existing laws, prohibition against discrimination by using consumer data to set higher prices based on an individual's race, color, religion, sexual orientation, and more. Prohibitions against using sensitive information like health, financial, biometric, and geolocation data without first obtaining users' express consent. And there are others, but I'm highlighting a few. Provisions that give consumers the right to request access to and deletion of their personal information that a company holds about them. Individuals can choose to limit a company's use of personal information to draw detailed inferences or make predictions about them, with certain exceptions. And significantly, a new rulemaking authority, resources and staff, are a part of this bill. That would allow the Federal Trade Commission to more aggressively pursue and punish bad actors, bolstered by enforcement by state attorneys general. We talked about living our values, and I wanted to give you an example of that. How do we signal that we're the kind of company that believes in human flourishing? Well, one option is to increase transparency and communicate openly. This is one small example from a project that the New York Times ran last year called the Privacy Project. They're trying to show readers how ad serving software works. So in the top example, they're trying to show you that if you'd seen an ad in that particular space, the ad that you'd likely be served would be making predictions based on your browsing history matched to your credit card history. And that in the bottom space, the ad you might be served would be based on your voter registration mixed with your browsing history. We need to, this is an example of how we help customers understand targeted messaging and ad serving technology, but this is just one sort of common everyday type of an example. In our own companies, we need to evaluate our data collection practices and better understand how to signal transparency, like proactively communicating when we ask questions or conduct surveys, why we ask for this, or factoring what we do with this data into our project development or our website development. We need to be willing to commit to longer development timeline in order to achieve more responsible data stewardship, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Right now. When customers give us their data, it's an act of trust. We do not own that data. If we use that data to make money, but then we don't protect it, we're exhibiting data entitlement. It's much better to build our companies around responsible data stewardship. So how can we do that? There are a couple of suggestions. Number one, first and foremost, need to look at our privacy policies. When was the last time you looked at your online privacy policy? Do you have an online privacy policy? We need to review them and communicate them clearly. We need to give users the option to opt out or to opt into what they're willing to share. We need to create a data accountability report, which is where we publish the results of a regular audit of our data assets, our data storage, and our data collection techniques. We should celebrate out loud internally at our company less data use and analyze very responsibly. So for example, conducting just enough research. I often hear people talk about how they really had one objective, but since they were doing research, they thought they would ask 3 or 4 other things. Maybe you don't need to do that every time. Maybe just focus on your primary objective. If you do have sensitive data that requires accessing, perhaps you pair employees to look at that data or do stuff with that data together so they can provide a checks and balance for each other and prevent mistakes. Second set eyes. You can establish a privacy committee, and again, as a part of that committee, conduct a regular audit and then publish it. Importantly, to those of us with small businesses that may not be doing a ton of data collection, we should really school ourselves on the data sharing agreements within our technology. If you have APIs, open APIs tied into your website or into applications that you use to run your business, you need to examine how data handoffs occur. These are common fault lines for breaches. We really need to secure our data before we share it, or just make sure that there's not a hidden vulnerability in one of our partner tools. We can reward employees who exercise the shared values that we develop, and because that will help them consider and avoid unintended consequences before they happen. Oops. Go back up. So let's circle back to customer centricity for a minute, and let's think about how this works in our own businesses. Many of us rely on key performance indicators, or KPIs, to make decisions. In our business, we think about awareness, satisfaction, retention, and customer lifetime value, and others, but those are common ones. The thing about KPIs is that they reveal well how the customer is performing for the company, but not how the company is performing for the customer. What specific outcomes do your customers expect? What customer performance indicators apply to your business, or CPIs? For example, do they want a fast quote? Are they looking for payment flexibility? Do they want to know where they stand on a waiting list? Are there multiple options available in their size? Are they looking for aha moments when they attend your events or download resources that you share? Customer performance indicators like size options or event attendance or resource downloads can dramatically impact your KPIs, like customer acquisition, retention, and referral rates. So if you're not tracking your CPIs, you might consider doing so. In a local example that I heard about recently, during COVID, the shutdown prompted a Detroit brick and mortar retailer to accelerate her e-commerce development. In doing so, she was able to do data analysis of customer purchases, and she realized that she could bundle a product offering she hadn't previously considered. That shift had significant positive revenue and customer satisfaction impact for her. In that case, her CPI, or her customer performance indicator, might be, find something in my size that matches that I can pick up locally, from her customer's perspective. You need to know your customers and their context in order to determine what CPIs make sense for your business. And if you don't know, you can conduct research like ethnography or contextual inquiry. And what that usually involves is observing customers in their natural habitat, like when they're shopping on an online website, or when they're doing home improvements, or whatever's related to your business. This method allows for a series of open-ended questions that are very responsive and in the moment during the observation that customers wouldn't typically answer, or that you wouldn't typically know to ask in a survey format. So if you haven't considered your CPIs, you might want to do so. In getting at customer centricity and data management within our companies, we need to think about if any of these folks work for us, or if we're one of these folks. In the first one, do you have a data analyst working for you who pulls data that doesn't really answer the question you asked, or you can't see the answer to the question you asked in what they gave you? Do you have a person who loves Salesforce for every situation? Do you have a person who doesn't want to bother the data analyst because the data analyst seems really busy? Or a person who prides themselves on doing it themselves and not asking for help? Do you have a person who doesn't trust data? Or a person who's afraid to show vulnerability about technology? Or a person who seems to be perpetually, or legitimately perpetually too busy to use data or learn data? or a person who knows that, data is the project of the week and it'll fall by the wayside if they just wait long enough. The point is, data is a form of communication. Everyone is coming in with different perspectives and needs and capacity and levels of expertise. And your fluency needs as an organization will continue to expand over time. So here are some things you can do. You can establish a data strategy, which means identifying crucial decisions that must be informed by data and focusing on those, right? Prioritize. Audit the data that you do have so that you're not duplicating your efforts. Lean toward the simplest tech solution that starts with the problem that needs to be solved first, if you're really trying to ramp up your staff. Number 2, get help if you need it. Hire a consultant, take some online classes, join professional organizations. I belong to one called the Data Visualization Society, which is free, which offers all kinds of training at all different levels and makes people aware of all different kinds of training. Number 3, you can establish and demonstrate organizational commitment all across the organization, starting with you as the owner, and all across the organization. And that's critical. If you tell people they have to do stuff, but you're not doing it too, they won't do it. Number 4, explain analytical choices. When you make a choice for your company based on analysis, talk it through with people. Talk through the trade-offs and the thinking behind the approach and encourage your staff to do the same so that people become familiar with the language of a data-based decision as opposed to everything which took place in here, in your head. Assign very clear roles when it comes to data management and data responsibilities. And again, if you're not sure what those are, refer back to the get help suggestion. And then number 6, evaluate your existing literacy. Choose appropriately intuitive systems. And again, if you're not sure what your choices are, ask for some help so that you can develop some shared capabilities. Define what to teach, define how to teach it, and conduct just-in-time training so that staff don't forget how to apply what they've learned. Because there's nothing worse than teaching everybody a whole bunch of stuff that you're not ready to do yet, and then they forget by the time you are ready to do it. And there's nothing more frustrating than being that staff person in that situation as well. Finally, this is a short list of my favorite resources for some additional learning. These include books, podcasts, webinars, coming at things from all different directions. But I thought that they're very accessible and interesting, and should be applicable despite what kind of business you're running. And there's tons more. And by checking these out, I'm sure you'll find tons more. Data is the first step toward impact. I like this image because it shows us, we don't just gather data for data's sake. We use it to form, to obtain some sort of information, which leads us to some kind of knowledge, which hopefully results in an insight, which then provides us with some wisdom. And at the end of the day, we end up with impact if we're doing it right. And impact gives us all purpose, but it must not come at the expense of our communities. Thank you. And now, Sarah, if you'd like to open it up for questions.
Sure. Thank you, Mary. It was really great information. So we did get one question so far, and they want to know, what is the name of the organization that you're involved with that offers the free training? You mentioned it when you were reciting the 6 things to help implement a data strategy.
Oh, there's an organization called the Data Visualization Society. So they're a free professional association, and you can go. I think it's just if you search Data Visualization Society, you'll find it. They run a newsletter called The Nightingale that's free on Medium too, which you could subscribe to.
Data Visualization Society, you said?
Yep.
All right, it is just datavisualizationsociety.com, everyone, but I will put it in the chat for us. So hopefully I got it right.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome. So it looks like it's got a lot of great resources. I had a couple of questions as we were going through this. What do you think are some of the better ways or the steps that we need to take to remove some of the bias in our data? Because, it's data is about people, it's used by people, all of that, but talk about implicit bias that comes with when people are involved. We just all have those types of things.
Yep. First, I think it's super helpful for people who are data analysts to study what bias is. There's lots of different kinds of bias besides implicit bias. So it's useful to just sort of do a quick perusal of what kinds of bias exist and what it looks like. And then it can be, and then I think that it's useful to have a team of folks who do analysis together, so that they, again, can provide some, and, I like to have diversity of team doing data analysis. And when I talk about diversity, I mean a lot of perspective too, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone always sort of goes to race with diversity, and that is absolutely an important component. But depending on your project, you also need perspective. Do you need to hear from single parents? Do you need to hear from people with physical disabilities, right? It depends on what the project has to do with. Are a multitude of religious perspectives useful on that study? And to your business. So, a way to get around or to sort of mitigate bias is to encourage sort of a team of multiple folks with some diversity of experience to look at that data together.
Okay. Another question we have came in from Trevor Nelson. It says, what is the best place to start learning data science to become a data analyst?
Well, I guess it sort of depends on where you're at in your career. There are a variety of online courses that you can find. I took a Fundamentals of Tableau course through Coursera that was run by UC Davis last winter, and I could have kept going with that if I wanted to really sort of immerse myself in data analysis. But there are a whole bunch. Many universities offer full certificates and or degrees with online learning related to data science. And again, I think you'll find if you are interested in data analysis or data science and you're just starting out in your career, I can't recommend the Data Visualization Society highly enough, because it's a really good community of people with access to all kinds of resources about training.
I'm just reading a question.
Sure.
Okay, it says, thanks, Mary. Our product is just-in-time training performance assurance. It verbally delivers step-by-step work instructions on demand, like Siri, then reports the time users spend on each step. Everything happens on the fly, so nothing is saved outside the cloud. We use and store client SOPs and performance data at process step and individual granularity, so continuous improvement, training, coaching opportunities are revealed. We're thinking about selling anonymized plus aggregated for performance data across the user base. We have a former NSA and CIA InfoSec associate advising, reviewing, and improving our policies and practices. She's also doing our white hat hacking. What would be your biggest worry in what we're doing?
It sounds like you already have an expert on this, which is great, and you're thinking about these things. The thing that just popped into my mind was, if you're thinking of selling data after you've already collected it, the agreement with your users has changed, right? So I would talk with her about what do you do about that? For any data that you've historically collected, is there an opportunity to reach back out and allow people to opt out before you take that data and start to use it in a different format than you did when you originally collected it? Hope that makes sense.
Said perfect, thanks. One thing I thought of is, I think we have a lot of startups and like entrepreneurs on this call. So when I think about getting started with data. Like, this is a huge world, and you talk about having teams, and we've got CIA and NSA people involved, but like, I'm a team of one that just wants to start up a business. Like, what is the best advice, or what's one thing that I should be really focused on initially to kind of get my business off the ground?
Number one, if you have a website, you should have a good privacy policy on there. And you should be thinking about, listen, we all use Google Analytics on our websites. In early works, we've been thinking that we might turn off Google Analytics for our website. And I know that you're probably thinking, what? But really, we don't get leads from random Google searches. That's not how we grow our business. Usually people hear about us through word of mouth or see us someplace in the world. And then they go search for early work. They put early works into their URL and find our website. So we don't really make changes to our site or attract new business in our business model because of Google Analytics. So maybe it's okay for us to turn off Google Analytics because we don't really need it in our business. And, so that's one thing. But you should look at your privacy policy, make sure you have one, and make sure you're following it. The other thing I sort of mentioned quickly, but it's the problem for all small businesses. We all use applications, and we all use APIs to our applications, right? We use Zapier. If we have MailChimp, we do an integration to our calendar tool or whatever. It's good to look into, or to ask someone to consult with you to look at the connections between those software packages, because sometimes that's where the breaches occur, very, very commonly. And you're just using two packages. You're using MailChimp and you're using, a calendar at Calendly, and they're both trusted. So you didn't know that there could be a vulnerability there. Well, there can be.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I have another question that came in. Is there any way to misguide algorithms to limit the amount of true data being collected? To piggyback off that question, does secret mode actually work? Does it actually hide the content you are viewing?
No, secret mode on Google is absolutely not real. If you want a ton more information than you could possibly hope for on this topic, you should check out Tectonic, which is a website by Mark Hurst, who runs a company called Good Experience. And he has a lot to say about secret mode and how it's very misleading it is. He believes that DuckDuckGo is the only browser that does not, that has sort of legitimate or, policies regarding web search behavior and data collection. In terms of your first question about confusing the algorithm, I think you probably can. So I do a lot of secondary research and have for many years. And so if you were to look into my search history, it's all over the place. It might have to do with dog food heavily one week, and it might be about designer coffee the next week, and it might be about data security the third week. So I think that my web history and my web search behavior is probably pretty confusing to the algorithms, but most people don't live like that. So, and now algorithms are doing a lot more than just tracking your web behavior. They're following my phone. They're paying attention to what I'm looking at on Instagram and when I'm taking screenshots and all that kind of stuff. So it's getting harder and harder to trick the algorithm is the long answer.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions. So on behalf of myself and all the attendees in Detroit Startup Week, we want to thank you, Mary, for shedding all this light on data fluency with us today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead. Oops, we got a last minute question in.
Okay.
I'm leading a startup team of 1+ contractors until we start meeting. Oh, the CIA NSA person's my daughter. It's always good to have family. Yes.
Awesome.
Well, luckily for you, Bill, you've got the right daughter at this point, I guess. You got the right person. So again, thank you, Mary, for all of your insight on data fluency. And everyone, thank you for attending. I'm going to go ahead and conclude our session and enjoy the rest of your summit.
Have a great day, everybody.